Human faced the ice beast to protect the alien girl, but she feared his rage more than the monster. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the story. The air was biting cold, and a thick layer of snow covered the ground as far as the eye could see. A fierce wind howled across the barren landscape, carrying with it the sharp sting of ice. In the distance, the towering form of an ice beast loomed, its monstrous silhouette barely visible against the snowstorm. But the real danger wasn't the beast. No, the real danger was the human standing between it and the alien girl he was determined to protect. David Moore stood tall, his breath forming clouds in the frozen air as he gripped his weapon tightly, staring down the beast. His heart pounded in his chest, but his resolve was unwavering. He wasn't about to let this creature harm her. Lyra, the alien girl, stood behind him, trembling not from the cold, but from something else entirely. She was afraid. But not of the ice beast. She feared the rage that was building within David. He had been quiet, his face hard as stone, eyes burning with a fury that was terrifying. His muscles tensed, ready to spring into action, and Lyra could sense the raw power he was about to unleash. She had seen humans angry before, but never like this. His anger seemed to consume him, a raging fire that threatened to burn everything in its path. And as much as she had come to trust him, she couldn't shake the feeling that if he let that fury loose, no one, not even the beast, would be able to stop him. David took a step forward, his gaze never leaving the beast's glowing eyes. The snow beneath his boots crunched with each step, and the tension in the air was palpable. The beast growled low, a deep rumble that echoed across the icy expanse. It was massive. Its body covered in thick, matted fur that blended seamlessly with the snow. Its claws scraped against the ground, leaving deep grooves in the ice as it advanced. David's grip tightened on his weapon, but he didn't make a move. Not yet. He was waiting, calculating. Lyra, her blue skin shimmering in the dim light of the storm, took a hesitant step forward. Her heart raced as she watched him. She had never seen him like this before, cold, detached, and ready to fight. He was a protector, yes, but in this moment, he seemed more like a predator, and she wasn't sure she was ready to face that side of him. David, she whispered, her voice trembling. Please, don't let your anger take over. The beast is dangerous, but, she paused, swallowing hard, but I'm more afraid of you right now. Her words hung in the air, carried away by the wind. David's expression softened just for a moment, but only for a moment. He turned slightly, his eyes locking with hers, and in that instant, she saw the conflict within him. He wanted to protect her, but he also wanted to destroy the beast that threatened her. The rage was there, simmering just beneath the surface, but there was also something else, a quiet determination, a fierce protectiveness that only he could feel. He took another step forward, his voice low and steady. I'll protect you, Lyra. I won't let anything happen to you. His words were a promise, and in that moment, Lyra realized that he wasn't just protecting her from the ice beast. He was also protecting her from himself. He was struggling to keep his anger in check, but the beast was pushing him to the edge. And in the end, it wasn't the beast that would decide their fate, it was the man standing before her, fighting to maintain control. As the ice beast let out a deafening roar and lunged forward, David took action. His weapon flashed in the dim light, and for a moment, all that could be heard was the sound of battle. But in that moment, something shifted. Lyra could see it in David's eyes. The rage was still there, but it was tempered with something more. A desire to protect, to fight not out of anger, but out of love. And for the first time, Lyra wasn't afraid. Not of the beast. Not of David. Just of the storm they both had to face together. David's eyes never left the beast as it roared in fury, its icy breath billowing into the air. Lyra stood behind him, her heart racing, not from fear of the creature but from the storm of emotions that churned within her. The human before her, the protector, was a force of nature himself. She could feel the raw power in every movement he made, the way he held his ground against the beast. But it wasn't just the beast she feared, it was the rage within David that was beginning to surface. His eyes, normally calm and steady, now held a burning intensity that made her hesitate. She had seen anger before, but this was something else. She wasn't sure if she was more afraid of the monster or of what might happen if David lost control. As the beast charged, its massive form closing the distance with terrifying speed, David took one last deep breath. His pulse quickened, and his grip tightened on his weapon. Lyra's breath caught in her throat as she realized that David wasn't just fighting to protect her. He was fighting for something deeper, his own inner battle. His rage threatened to break free, but he held it back, focused entirely on the task at hand. The beast lunged forward, its claws slashing through the air with deadly precision. David moved instinctively, sidestepping with the grace of a trained warrior, and in one fluid motion, he struck. The creature recoiled, its massive form shaking with the impact of the blow. For a moment, there was silence. The beast seemed to hesitate, confused by the human's sudden strength. Lyra's eyes widened in awe as she watched David. He was more than just a man, he was a protector, a force that refused to back down, no matter the odds. And yet, she could still sense the storm within him. The beast, injured but not defeated, regrouped and charged once more. David was ready. His body moved with a fluidity that came from years of training, every muscle in perfect harmony as he blocked and countered the creature's assault. Each strike, each movement was precise, calculated. But Lyra could see it, the flicker of restraint in his eyes. He wasn't just fighting for survival. He was fighting to control something within himself, something that could consume him. If he allowed it. David, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the roar of the storm. Her eyes were locked on him, her heart aching as she realized the true cost of his battle. He wasn't just protecting her from the beast. He was protecting her from the darkness inside him. As the beast lunged again, David's expression shifted. He knew this would be the final blow. With a cry of determination, he charged forward, his weapon raised high. The beast, caught off guard by the sudden aggression, faltered for just a moment. That was all David needed. With a swift motion, he struck, sending the beast crashing to the ground with a final, bone-rattling thud. Silence descended over the snowy battlefield. The only sound was the howling wind and David's labored breath as he stood over the fallen creature. His chest heaved, his body trembling with the adrenaline of the fight. But despite the victory, Lyra couldn't help but notice the weight in his eyes, the shadow of something he had barely kept at bay. Slowly, David turned to face her. His expression softened, the fury that had burned in him now dimming. "It's over," he said, his voice rough but steady. Lyra nodded, though the fear in her heart hadn't completely faded. She knew that this battle had been more than just physical. For both of them. And as they stood there, in the stillness of the frozen world, Lyra couldn't help but wonder, how long could David keep his rage in check before it consumed him completely? David stood there, his breath still heavy, his body aching from the battle. The snow was stained with the beast's blood, a stark contrast against the pristine white landscape. His weapon hung loosely in his hand, the adrenaline fading, leaving only the weight of what had just transpired. Lyra, still standing a few feet away, watched him closely, her eyes filled with a mix of awe and concern. She could see the subtle tremor in his hands, the way his chest rose and fell with each breath. He was still holding on to something, some part of him that was clearly struggling to stay in control. She knew that the fight with the ice beast was just a small part of a much larger battle he was facing. But what surprised her more than anything was the silence between them. The monster was dead, but the tension in the air remained. "David," she called softly, taking a step toward him. Her voice was hesitant, almost fragile, as if she wasn't sure how to approach him. He turned to face her slowly, his expression unreadable. There was a flicker of something in his eyes, something that wasn't there before. Maybe it was the lingering anger, or maybe it was just exhaustion. Either way, Lyra could feel it. He was still holding something inside, something he didn't want her to see. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice a little more steady now. David didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked out over the snowy expanse, his gaze distant. The wind whipped around them, but neither of them moved. The world felt strangely still, as if it were waiting for something. Finally, David spoke, his voice low and rough. "I'm fine," he said, though Lyra could hear the uncertainty in his words. I just need a moment." Lyra nodded, understanding more than he knew. She could see how much the battle had cost him, not just physically but emotionally. The rage he had kept bottled up was still there, simmering beneath the surface. She didn't know what had happened to him before they met, but she could tell that he was haunted by something. Maybe it was the anger, maybe it was the fear of losing control, but it was something that he was fighting every day. And she wasn't sure if she was ready to understand it all. But she knew one thing, she wasn't going to leave him alone in this. She stepped closer to him, her eyes never leaving his face. "You don't have to do this alone, David," she said softly, the words just above a whisper. For a moment, she thought he might pull away, but instead, he looked down at her, his expression softening just slightly. "I'm not alone," he replied, his voice quieter now. "I have you." The words hung in the air between them, and Lyra felt her heart beat a little faster. She wasn't sure what it was, maybe it was the weight of the moment, or maybe it was the way his eyes looked at her, but in that instant, she realized something. She wasn't afraid of him. Not anymore. Whatever darkness he carried, whatever rage he was struggling with, she could see that. It didn't define him. He was more than that. He was human. And in that moment, that was enough. The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was peaceful, as if they had finally found a moment of understanding. They stood together in the snow, surrounded by the vast emptiness of the frozen landscape. The storm had died down, and the sun, now low on the horizon, cast a soft golden glow over everything. David took a deep breath, letting it out slowly, as if he were finally able to let go of something he had been holding onto for far too long. Lyra watched him, her heart swelling with a mixture of relief and something else, something she wasn't quite ready to name. She took another step forward, standing beside him now, their shoulders almost touching. "Let's go back," she said, her voice firm yet gentle. "You don't have to do this on your own anymore." David looked at her, his expression unreadable for a moment, before he gave a small nod. "All right," he said, his voice steadier than it had been before. Together, they turned and walked back toward the shelter, their footsteps leaving a trail in the snow behind them. The journey ahead would not be easy, but for the first time in a long time, David didn't feel so alone. And neither did Lyra. The cold wind bit at their skin as David and Lyra made their way back to the shelter. The storm had passed, but the world around them remained a vast, frozen wilderness, untouched and silent. David's thoughts were a mix of relief and confusion. The battle with the ice beast felt like a distant memory now, yet the anger he had fought so hard to control lingered in the back of his mind. He couldn't forget the way it had consumed him in that moment. He had fought with a fury he didn't even know he had, and for a moment, he had been afraid of what might happen if he let go of that control. Lyra walked beside him, her steps light but cautious. She had sensed the shift in him during the fight. She had seen the battle he was fighting not just against the beast but against himself. But now, as they walked together, there was a quiet understanding between them. She didn't push him to talk. She didn't need to. She knew that he would open up when he was ready. But part of her also wondered if he would ever truly be able to let go of the darkness that haunted him. "Are you sure you're all right?" Lyra asked after a few moments of silence. Her voice was soft, but it carried a weight of concern. David glanced at her, surprised by the question. He had expected silence, or maybe a few words of thanks for saving her life. But instead, she was looking at him as if she could see through all the walls he had built around himself. "I'm fine," he said, his voice rough but steady. But as he said the words, he knew they weren't entirely true. He had always been fine, always able to push through the pain, the anger, the fear. But this time, something was different. He wasn't sure if it was the battle, or the way Lyra had looked at him afterward, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something inside him was shifting. Something he wasn't sure he was ready to face. They reached the shelter, a small, makeshift structure built from whatever materials they had been able to scavenge. The warmth inside was a relief after the biting cold outside, and they both shed their outer layers, the heat from the fire making their skin tingle. David sat down near the fire, rubbing his hands together to warm them. He was exhausted, but the tension in his body wouldn't ease. Lyra sat across from him, her gaze never leaving his face. There was something in her eyes, a quiet strength, as if she had already made up her mind about something. "David," she said after a moment, her voice gentle but firm. "You don't have to carry this alone. Whatever it is that you're fighting inside of you, you don't have to do it by yourself." David's heart skipped a beat, and for the briefest moment, he was tempted to push her away, to hide everything he had been carrying for so long. But something in her eyes stopped him. There was no judgment there, only understanding, and the kind of patience he hadn't realized he needed. "I don't know how to stop it," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "The anger, the rage. It's always there, simmering just beneath the surface. And I'm scared of what might happen if I let it go." Lyra's expression softened, and she moved closer to him, her presence warm and steady. "You don't have to be afraid," she said, her voice like a balm to his soul. "You've already proven that you can control it. You've already proven that you're stronger than the rage." David looked at her, the weight of her words sinking in. He had always believed that his anger was a part of him, something he had to fight against, but Lyra was right. He had already won that battle once. Maybe it was time to stop seeing his anger as his enemy. Maybe it was time to accept that it was just a part of him, something he could learn to live with. For the first time in a long time, he felt a glimmer of hope. It wasn't much, but it was enough. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. Lyra smiled, her eyes bright. "You don't have to thank me. I'm here for you. And I always will be." The fire crackled between them, its warmth a reminder of the connection they had forged in the heat of battle. And as they sat together in the stillness of the shelter, David finally allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as alone as he had always thought. David woke up to the soft glow of the morning sun filtering through the cracks in the shelter. The storm from the night before had passed, leaving behind a blanket of fresh snow. The cold air was crisp, but inside the shelter, there was warmth from the small fire still burning. Lyra was already awake, sitting by the fire, her eyes focused on the flames as if lost in thought. He sat up slowly, stretching his stiff muscles, and for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel the weight of the anger that had always been a constant companion. Instead, there was a strange sense of peace settling over him, a feeling that he hadn't experienced in what felt like forever. As he looked over at Lyra, he saw that she was looking at him now, her expression soft but unreadable. She didn't say anything at first, just watched him quietly as he stood up and moved toward the fire. "Morning," he said, his voice still a bit rough from the previous night. Lyra gave him a small smile, her eyes bright. "Morning," she replied. "Sleep well?" David hesitated, then nodded. "Better than I expected." Lyra's smile widened, though there was still a hint of concern in her gaze. "I'm glad," she said softly. They sat in silence for a moment, the only sound being the crackling of the fire. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence, but it was filled with unspoken things, emotions that neither of them were ready to voice. David could feel the weight of his past still lingering, but it didn't feel as heavy now. Lyra's presence, her calm understanding, had somehow lightened the burden he had carried for so long. He wasn't sure what had changed, but something inside him had shifted. He wasn't sure if it was because of the battle with the beast, or the way Lyra had stayed by his side, but for the first time, he felt like maybe, just maybe, he could begin to let go of the anger that had consumed him for so long. "David," Lyra said suddenly, breaking the silence. "You don't have to carry it alone, you know." David looked at her, surprised by the words. "I know," he said, his voice soft. "But it's not that simple. I've been carrying this rage for so long. I don't know how to let go of it." Lyra's expression softened even more, and she stood up, walking over to him. She placed a hand on his shoulder, and for the first time, David didn't flinch away. "You don't have to let go of it all at once," she said gently. "You don't have to be perfect. You just have to take it one step at a time. I'm here with you, David. And I'll be here as long as you need me." David's heart swelled at her words, and for a moment, he didn't know how to respond. He wasn't used to this kind of kindness, this kind of understanding. But as he looked into Lyra's eyes, he realized that he didn't need to say anything. She understood. They both understood. The journey ahead of them wasn't going to be easy. There would be challenges, and there would be days when the anger and the fear threatened to pull him back into the darkness. But for the first time in a long time, David felt like he wasn't fighting alone. He had someone by his side. And maybe that was enough. The fire crackled softly in the background as they stood there together, their silent understanding wrapping around them like a comforting blanket. In that moment, David felt something he hadn't felt in years: hope. Maybe they could make it through this. Maybe they could face whatever came next, together. As the days passed, David and Lyra found a rhythm in their lives. The cold of the outside world was relentless, but inside the shelter, they built something that felt like a small haven. Every day, they took turns keeping the fire burning, gathering supplies, and maintaining the shelter. But the work was never the hardest part. The hardest part was facing the silence between them, the unsaid words that seemed to hang in the air. David knew he wasn't the same man he had been when he first met Lyra. The anger, the rage that had defined him for so long, still lingered. But now, it was manageable. With each passing day, he felt it slip a little further away. It wasn't easy, and some days were harder than others, but Lyra's presence made it bearable. She was patient with him, never pushing him to open up, but always there, a steady presence in the storm of his mind. There were moments when he caught himself watching her, wondering how she could remain so calm in the face of everything that had happened. She had been through so much more than he had. She had seen her own people fall, her home destroyed, yet she carried herself with a quiet strength that David envied. "David, are you still thinking about it?" Lyra asked one afternoon, breaking the silence. They were sitting by the fire, the warmth of the flames making the space feel cozy despite the harsh world outside. David looked up from the fire, meeting her gaze. He knew exactly what she was referring to, the rage that still simmered within him. "I'm trying not to," he said, his voice steady but carrying the weight of his inner struggle. "But some days, it's hard. I don't want to be that man anymore, the one who lets his anger control him. But I don't know if I can ever completely let it go." Lyra was silent for a moment, her eyes thoughtful as she considered his words. "You don't have to be perfect, David," she said gently. "You just have to keep trying. No one can change overnight. But I believe in you." Her words, simple as they were, felt like a balm to his soul. It was hard for David to believe in himself sometimes, but when Lyra said something like that, it made him feel like maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as lost as he thought. He smiled faintly, grateful for her understanding. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Lyra's smile was soft, and she didn't respond with words. Instead, she reached over and placed her hand on his, a silent gesture of support. For the first time in a long while, David didn't feel alone in the battle within himself. They sat there in comfortable silence for a while, the crackling of the fire the only sound between them. As the days went on, they grew closer, not just as allies, but as something more. David could feel it, the bond that was slowly forming between them. It wasn't rushed, it wasn't forced. It was just natural. There were no expectations, no pressure. Just two people finding solace in each other's company. As the sun began to set one evening, casting a soft glow over the snow-covered landscape, David and Lyra found themselves standing outside the shelter, looking out at the horizon. The world was quiet, peaceful in a way that felt almost unreal. Lyra turned to him, her face lit by the fading light. "David, do you ever wonder what comes next?" she asked, her voice soft but curious. He looked at her, considering the question. The future was something that had always felt uncertain, something he hadn't thought about much. But now, with Lyra by his side, it didn't seem so daunting. "I think," he began, his voice thoughtful, "that the next step doesn't matter as much as the one we're taking right now. I don't know what the future holds, but as long as we're together, I think we'll be all right." Lyra smiled, and for a moment, it felt like the weight of the world had lifted from their shoulders. They didn't need to know the future. They had each other, and that was enough for now. Together, they stood there in the quiet of the evening, the future uncertain but the present, for the first time in a long time, filled with hope. The days seemed to stretch on in a peaceful rhythm, with each passing one feeling a little lighter than the last. David and Lyra had settled into a comfortable routine, the fire crackling warmly at the center of their shelter while the world outside remained a vast, frozen wasteland. The two of them had come to rely on each other in ways that neither had anticipated. For David, it was a quiet revelation. He had always believed he could handle anything on his own, but now, with Lyra by his side, he realized how much he had been missing. It wasn't just the protection she offered, or the way she had helped him find peace within himself, it was her presence, the simple fact that she was there, sharing the quiet moments with him, that made the difference. Lyra, on the other hand, had learned to trust again. Her life had been defined by loss, by the destruction of her people, and the constant struggle for survival. She had never expected to find a connection like the one she had with David. He wasn't just a human, he was someone who had faced his own demons and was still standing, still fighting. And he had shown her that maybe, just maybe, she could hope for something more than just survival. One morning, after weeks of silence on the matter, David finally turned to her with a question that had been weighing on his mind. "Lyra, do you ever think about going home?" The question seemed simple enough, but it caught Lyra off guard. Her gaze flickered to the window of the shelter, where the snow still blanketed the ground outside, and for a moment, she was lost in thought. Her home, her world, had been destroyed. The people she had known were gone, and the thought of returning to a place that no longer existed was too painful to bear. "I do," she admitted after a long pause. "But it's not the same as it used to be. It's hard to imagine what home would even mean anymore." David nodded, his expression thoughtful. He understood. He had lost his own life before, his family, his purpose, but the difference was that he still had something to fight for. He still had a chance to rebuild. And with Lyra, he had found a reason to hope again. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I didn't mean to bring up painful memories." Lyra shook her head, her eyes meeting his with a quiet strength. "It's okay. I've had to face a lot of things I didn't want to. But I've learned something through all of this." She paused, the words coming slowly as if she were still processing them. "I've learned that sometimes, home isn't a place. It's a person." David felt the weight of her words settle over him like a soft, comforting blanket. The truth in them was undeniable. Home wasn't just about where you were, or what you had, it was about who you had beside you, who you could trust. And in that moment, he realized that Lyra was his home, just as much as he was hers. The fire crackled softly between them as they sat in silence, the world outside still and unchanging. It was a simple truth, one that didn't need words to be understood. They had found something in each other that was worth fighting for, something that was worth building together. The future was still uncertain, and there were still battles ahead. But for the first time in a long time, David felt a sense of peace. He wasn't alone in this anymore. And neither was Lyra. Together, they had found a reason to keep moving forward, to keep fighting for something greater than just survival. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow across the snowy landscape, David and Lyra stood together, looking out at the world beyond. It was a vast, empty place, but for the first time, it didn't feel so lonely. With each other, they had everything they needed. And maybe that was enough. The days continued to pass by in the small shelter, and with each one, David and Lyra found more comfort in the routine they had built together. The icy winds outside were relentless, but inside, they had forged a space of warmth and quiet understanding. Lyra had noticed how David had become more at ease, how his mind seemed to be settling, no longer constantly haunted by the weight of his anger. It was a subtle change, but it was there. His movements were less tense, his eyes less burdened. He no longer wore the same mask of constant vigilance. He smiled more now, even if it was brief, even if it was only for her. It was the little things. He was healing, slowly but surely. And Lyra, though her own heart still carried scars, felt something shift within her as well. She had come to rely on David in ways she hadn't expected. The trust between them had grown over the weeks, deepening with every shared task, every shared moment of silence. It wasn't just the physical support he gave her, it was the emotional space he had created, the way he had shown her that not all battles had to be fought alone. But still, the world outside loomed large, and the uncertainties of the future were never far from her mind. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Lyra found herself staring out the window at the stars, the cold night sky vast and endless. The crackling fire cast warm light over their faces, but the distance between the stars seemed infinite. It made her wonder, again, about what was next. She turned to David, who was quietly sharpening his knife, his focus on the task in front of him. There was a quiet strength in him, a steadiness she admired. "David," she said softly, her voice breaking the silence, "do you ever think about what comes after this? After we've rebuilt, after we've done what we can?" David paused, his hands stilling for a moment. He didn't look up immediately, but when he did, there was a deep thoughtfulness in his gaze. "I think about it sometimes," he said, his voice low, steady. "But I don't have all the answers. I think the future is something we build, piece by piece. I never thought I'd be here, and I never thought I'd be with someone like you." Lyra's heart skipped a beat at his words. The warmth of the fire seemed to deepen as she looked at him, seeing not just the man who had fought to protect her, but the man who had opened up to her in a way no one ever had. She had never expected to find something so real. "I never thought I'd find this either," Lyra whispered. "But I'm not afraid of it anymore. Not with you by my side." David's expression softened, and he set the knife down, his gaze never leaving hers. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. The silence comfortable and full of meaning. "We've both lost so much," he said quietly. "But we're still here. And that has to count for something." Lyra nodded, a smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "Yes," she agreed. "It counts for everything." The fire crackled softly, the warmth surrounding them, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Lyra felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. Not because the world outside was easy or because everything was perfect, but because they had each other. And that made all the difference. In the quiet of the shelter, surrounded by the endless snow, the future didn't seem as daunting as it had before. It seemed full of possibility, full of hope. They didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but they knew they would face it together, one step at a time. And for now, that was enough. As the days turned into weeks, David and Lyra found themselves in a new phase of their journey. The shelter, once a place of survival, now felt like home. The work was still hard, the future still uncertain, but there was a sense of peace in the air that neither of them had expected. David had started to teach Lyra more about the world he had known before it all changed, his past, his family, the earth he came from. Lyra, in turn, shared more about her people, her culture, the things that had once been familiar to her but now seemed like stories from a faraway place. They didn't need to fill the silence anymore. The words flowed naturally between them, and the bond they had forged only grew stronger with each passing day. One morning, as the sun rose over the horizon, casting a soft golden light over the snowy landscape, David stood outside the shelter, looking at the world beyond. The wind had died down, leaving a stillness that felt almost surreal. Lyra joined him, standing by his side. They didn't speak at first. There was no need. The silence between them felt comfortable now, a shared understanding that needed no words. After a long pause, Lyra finally spoke, her voice soft but steady. "David, do you ever wonder if there's more out there? More than just us, just this?" David turned to look at her, his brow furrowing slightly as he thought about her question. He hadn't really allowed himself to think about the world beyond the small corner they had carved out for themselves. It was easier that way, to focus on the present, to take things day by day. But Lyra's question stirred something in him, something he hadn't considered in a long time. "I don't know," he said slowly, his voice thoughtful. "Sometimes I think about what we lost, about the world we used to know. But when I look at you, when I look at how far we've come, I start to wonder if maybe the world we're building is enough." Lyra smiled, a quiet, content smile. She understood. She didn't need more than this, more than what they had built together. "It is enough," she said softly. As long as we have each other, it's enough. David nodded, his heart swelling with a mixture of gratitude and something else, something he hadn't quite understood yet. But as he looked at Lyra, standing beside him, her presence a quiet anchor in his life, he realized something. The world outside might have changed, but this connection between them was something that would always endure. For the first time in a long time, David felt hopeful. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew that as long as they were together, they could face whatever came their way. They had survived the hardest part. And now, it was time to build something new. Together. Lyra reached out and took his hand, her grip warm and reassuring. David squeezed her hand, a silent promise that they would face whatever came next as one. The world beyond was still vast and uncertain, but in that moment, they both knew that they had found something real, something worth fighting for. And no matter how cold the world outside became, they had each other. And that was enough.